And we want to say thanks to our friends, FOWL, Friends of the Waccamaw Library, FOWL. They make this program possible, and all our programs really, and they make this place beautiful. Lovely big backyard out back. Now we got the wonderful weather coming in. Go out back and look at the backyard. It's beautiful, peaceful place. And we have Carol Lice back there. She prepares coffee, tea, water for us. So anytime during this program, go back and help yourself, please, to those refreshments. We appreciate that. And all our wonderful friends, volunteers. If you're not a member, we really encourage you to join. They're wonderful people, and they really keep us going here. So it's a great organization to join up and really become part of this community. And we're thrilled today for the month of April. This is National Poetry Month, so we got a great event here, program that dovetails. We try to do something to celebrate this every April, and I think we've got the best poet in South Carolina today with us to celebrate National Poetry Month, Dr. Ray McManus. So Dr. McManus is the author of 5 poetry books now. He just had one fresh and hot off the press. But he started out with Driving Through the Country Before You Are Born from USC Press in 2007, Red Dirt Jesus from Merrick in 2011, Punch, period, from Hub City, a great press up in the upstate in 2014. And then his latest, The Last Saturday in America, which came out again from Hub City, and it just came out last month. So it's 2 weeks ago, not even, last month, barely. The Last Saturday in America, and he brought some copies, a handful of copies, and Nancy is here, our wonderful FOWL volunteer. She will sell you these one of these copies, so you can take a little piece of Ray McManus with you afterwards, which I think you would like to do. But it's hot off the press, and you just go right across down the hall to our wonderful Friends Center and buy a copy right there, and Ray would be happy to sign it and personalize it for you. The Last Saturday in America, which is getting awesome press. So it's a hot poetry book. Ray writes about the rural and sometimes repressive Southern culture right here in South Carolina. He's a major voice not only in Southern poetry but South Carolina poetry. He grew up in rural Lexington County, in kind of farm country. I remember his mailbox where his family moved in. The original name on the mailbox, it was just kind of stenciled in, was Jesse Dirty Boy Brown. Is that correct? So he's got a lot of stories like that, and they show up in his poems. He writes about that. It's not all, daffodils and lovely wandering clouds and things like that. He's a red dirt kind of guy, and it shows up in his. He makes poetry talk about real things. Exploring issues of masculinity, parenthood. He's a parent. He just became, if you can believe it, a grandfather. He's Pops now, or Papa. Very proud grandfather. And work. There's a lot about work. He grew up working class, and he's still very much a hard worker. So a lot of those themes that people can relate to, and it's very accessible poetry. It's not off in the airy distance. He earned his MFA in poetry and his PhD in rhetoric and composition from the University of South Carolina up in Columbia. He's all about spreading the value of poetry out there to others. He founded creative writing outreach programs that put writers in classrooms and in communities. So he's done that for decades now. He's been honored in numerous honors, but to just cite a few, the 2023 South Carolina Arts Commission Artist Award, that's a biggie. That's about the highest honor you can get in the state of South Carolina for an artist. He's writer in residence for the Columbia Museum of Art, and he runs a podcast called Binder from that. He's division chair of humanities at the University of South Carolina Sumter, and he also is the former chair of the South Carolina Academy of Authors. So he does a lot of service as well as honors for the good of literature in South Carolina. All right, so let's welcome in Dr. Ray McManus.
Well, I don't know how to follow up all of that. I'll try not to ruin it. So Dan had asked me if I'd come and I'd talk, and I said, sure. You want me to come and talk? Do you want me to read? He's like, yeah. I'm like, all right, I'll do both. But I think the topic is why write? And, so I thought a lot about that for about last month or so. I'm kidding. I've been thinking about that ever since I started writing. Why write? Why do any of this? Why is any of this even remotely important? And I've come up with a couple of answers. One's a very short answer. Why write? Because we're all going to die. That's pretty simple, right? Okay, but then still, why write? Ultimately, what I have determined as the sole purpose for writing is the fact that we all have the power to observe, to be aware, to reveal, to leave something behind for the next generation to come by and perhaps grab a hold of what we've shared as writers. Everything in life, of course, is fleeting. And living in South Carolina, I've lived here my entire life. I think even though in the southern winds it seems to suggest nothing changes, but everything is changing. Everything is moving fast. And of course, life has a wonderful way of reminding us of that pure fact. I was thinking that the other day, driving down the road. I was like, man, there was a time when me and another guy, we could lift the block of an engine out of a car. And now if I turn too far over to my right to check to see if the lane is clear, I'll pull a muscle in my neck and I can't walk for 3 days or something, I mean, there's just all these reminders that everything around us is happening fast. And I get asked often about what it's like to be a poet. And I get asked often, or not asked, but told how cool it must be to be a poet. Well, I'm going to go ahead and tell you, it is not cool at all being a poet. It's terrible, okay? It is a compulsion that I have to write poetry. But can you imagine trying to enjoy a birthday party, trying to enjoy a moment, a singular moment for just that moment and what it might be, and all I can do is think about how that can be a poem. And if I'm not writing, how many poems am I missing? If this moment goes by and I don't stop to record it, will anybody else ever remember it? So that's why I write. I'm not suggesting that it should be the reason why everybody writes, but that is why I write. I didn't know it early on. I didn't grow up in a house where I had parents who were poets or who wrote poetry or who read poetry. I didn't have parents who were English professors. I grew up in a working class household in rural Lexington County, on a dirt road in a house that my dad built with his bare hands that he didn't finish building until after I had moved out. I recall moving into a house that had no interior walls and no running water and no electricity. And let me tell you, me and my sister, that was wild. But I still remember that. And I can remember that it wasn't that long ago, about 30 or so years ago, that I was sitting on the front porch of that house and I'm watching dump trucks and road scrapers go up and down the dirt road thinking, hey, maybe I could do that. That's where my dreams were. I could drive a road scraper or a dump truck, because where I grew up, that was the reality. That was what you could aspire to be. Rich people went to college. The rest of us went to work. And so I started working when I was 13 years old. You know, when I say started working 13 years, I mean working for somebody other than my dad and getting actually paid for it. You know, I'd say if I included that time, probably as old as I could walk and carry things, you know, I was working. All I've ever known was work. So there was a moment, probably about 10th grade of high school, and this is how I stumbled into poetry, where I got in a little trouble. I was not what you would call a model high school student. In fact, I wasn't a good student at all. I didn't even hardly go to high school much. You know, we would cut class, and they would give us, tell me if this isn't a crazy form of punishment, if you skipped class or skipped school, they gave you a day suspension. I called that a 2-for-1, buy one, get one free, you know. And so it got to a point where a lot of us, we were starting to miss too many days. And the state of South Carolina wouldn't allow the school to suspend us because it would put us over the 10 unexcused absence threshold, and that would be problematic. So they invented in-school suspension. And in-school suspension back then was sit in the library all day. You got to eat lunch, but only with the other troublemakers in school suspension. Couldn't see your friends or anything. And you had to sit at a table all by yourself. And there'd be a pile of books on the table. And you would have your work you would have to do for class, but when that was done, if you had any free time, you were to pick up a book and you were supposed to read it, and you had to write a 1-page synopsis of the book. Well, this is before I learned anything about the laws of plagiarism. So I would just look at the back of the book and be like, all right, and I'd write my 1-page synopsis. And these weren't impressive books, okay? This was motocross, Jacques Cousteau. I mean, I like Jacques Cousteau, but the history of John Deere tractors. I mean, I went to Gilbert High School, okay? So, you know, we didn't have like a ton of, you know, highbrow literature in our library. But there was this one book called Sound and Sense, A Poet's Perspective. And I started thumbing through this book because it didn't look like the other books. And I don't know why it was on my table. I don't know if it was something divine. I don't know if the librarian just saw something. I don't know if maybe it was a joke, but it was there. And I started thumbing through it. And I'm finding this language that I had never seen before. Using words that I probably should have known, but I was not on a track for SATs. I wasn't learning SAT words. So I was learning, but I'm looking at these poems and looking at these poets, and these are poets I should have known by then, but I had no idea who Robert Frost was, or Gwendolyn Brooks, or Elizabeth Bishop. And I'm reading these things, and I'm like, man, these would make really cool song lyrics for the band that me and my buddies are going to form. And we already had it picked out, who was going to play what. I was going to write all the songs and get the girls, all of this fun stuff, and then we would learn how to play musical instruments later. And so I start thumbing through this thing, and before I know it, 3:15 comes along, the bell rings, we're supposed to leave. We were free then to run amok, you know, in through the town of Gilbert. And I didn't want to let that book go, because quite frankly, I was scared if I put it back up on the shelf, I'd never find it again, so I stole it. I did not know that stealing that book of poetry would save my life. I was with groups that, for all intents and purposes, at this point, there might be 1 or 2 that still survive. The rest are dead or in jail, serving lifetime sentences for horrible things. And I don't know why, but something told me maybe I could do something with this. So I would start writing little poems, I wouldn't call them poems, just call them lyrics, you know. And I'd just write these little things and I'd give them to girls and they'd look at them and go, what the hell is this? And I'm like, it's a poem. And I'm like, okay, probably threw it in the trash, I don't know, but it did help my ego a little bit. They smiled. But I had an English teacher walk by one day and saw it and took it off my desk. I thought I was in trouble. After class, she calls me up to the desk. She says, what is this? I said, I don't know, just some stuff I'm kind of messing around with. She's like, keep doing this. This is good. That's the first time, mind you, that I was ever complimented for doing anything good in a classroom. So I liked that feeling. That feeling was good. So I kept doing it. and I had no idea what I was doing. I wasn't reading poetry. I didn't know really anything about poetry. I was just writing my feelings, writing things that I just thought. And occasionally, because there's not much to do in Gilbert. I don't know if you know where Gilbert is, but its call to fame is the July 4th. They have the big peach festival there, and that's about it. There are no stoplights. There's one gas station, one place to eat, but like 4 schools. So very much a farming rural community. And I didn't quite fit in with that. As you can imagine, with a mohawk or long hair and listening to punk, and I was your classic easy mark for trouble. But as I started writing, I was finding ways to get a lot of those things and feelings that I had to express how I felt without using a brick through a window, or without finding alcohol or drugs, or without wanting to get in a fight with somebody. And slowly but surely, what was happening was my friends were kind of finding out that I was doing this. And so we'd be hanging out at the pipelines, hanging out in a field somewhere, and like, Ray, read us a poem. And here I am standing in the back of a pickup truck in the middle of nowhere, reading God knows what, and they all liked it. And I liked it. I liked the fact that they liked it. So I went to my guidance counselor, and I said, you know what? I was in small engine repair at the time, because that's how they pitched it to us in 9th grade. You could take really hard college prep classes, and I mean hard classes, or you could take shop classes. And you would leave school to go to the vocational center, and your senior year you could leave early to go work. And we were like, sign me up, that's what I'm doing. And I'm going to do small engine repair because then I could work on Harley Davidsons. And how cool would that be to work on Harley Davidsons? Except we didn't work on Harley Davidsons. We worked on lawnmowers and weed eaters and chainsaws. All right. Now I'm the resident expert in my neighborhood, and I love it that when people come up and like, hey man, can you get my lawnmower running? And I do. You know, it's really not that hard, really. If you know a little bit about Buddhism and how to troubleshoot things, you can work on a lawnmower. But I knew that probably wasn't going to be something I could have a nice long career out of. There's no retirement in small engine repair. So I went to my guidance counselor my senior year of high school and said, you know what, changed my mind. I think I want to go to college. Pulls out my file out of the file cabinet, looks over at it, chuckles a little bit, and goes, I don't think you got what it takes to go to college. Which is exactly what I needed to hear, because I loved it when somebody told me I couldn't do something. So I went to college. I went to Midlands Technical College because that was the one place I could get into where I could take the courses I should have taken probably while I was in high school. And I took that one English class. Really, it wasn't even called English. It was like critical thinking or something. And it was really more philosophy than it was anything else. And this guy that was teaching it, by the name of Curtis Derrick, I thought he was really cool because he had a ponytail and a long beard. And I thought, man, this guy's kind of cool. And he starts telling me about a literary journal they had there at Midlands Tech. And I was like, well, I write poems. I'll send some. And I did. And they published them. And I liked that. Now, I will go ahead and tell you that the 1991-1992 Stylus magazine, somewhere out there in the world, I only own one copy and I keep it buried in a box, but every now and then my wife takes it out and reads that poem out to me, much to my chagrin, because it is horrible. It is the worst thing I've ever written. But I was so proud of it, and I liked that feeling. And he told me, he's like, man, why are you wasting your time? What do you want to do? I was like, I don't know, maybe I'll go into English education. He's like, just be an English major. I'm like, okay, I didn't know. So I went to USC Aiken because I was a little scared to go to the big school. Went to USC Aiken, lo and behold, run into another English professor. This for upper American Lit or something like that. And this guy was by the name of Stephen Gardner. And a pretty accomplished poet, but you wouldn't have known it. This guy looked like, he slept under a bridge. I mean, at the time, long hair, scraggly beard, but an amazing teacher. And when he read poems, I mean, you felt them, which I had never had that experience because I couldn't hear a voice in my head when I read poems. I heard my voice, but I couldn't hear how they were supposed to be read. And I'm listening to that. So I go up to him one day and I was like, hey, Dr. Gardner, I've got poems. Would you mind looking at them? he said, sure, Bubba. Yeah, send them to me. So I did. I gave him a whole big packet. And every day I'd go to class thinking he was going to call me after class and tell me, Ray, this is the best stuff I have ever read. You are an amazing poet. You need to go to New York City. I don't know where I would go as a poet. Honestly, I didn't even know if there were poets in New York City. But that never came. In fact, it was all the way to the very last day of class, the final exam. And as I turned in my exam, was walking out, he goes, oh, Ray, here. And he hands me my packet back. My heart's beating real fast. Can't wait to get out to the car, open it up. And his comments were kind, but basically said, hey man, keep writing. This is not good. There'd be a line here, he'd be like, ooh, I like that. Or there'd be a stanza there where he'd say, this is your poem. Or he would write these comments, I want to know the poem behind the poem. Which later I figured out what he meant by that. But at the time, I was like, man, he's being really nice and very generous, but this isn't what I wanted to hear. And then he put down a list of poets that I needed to read. So I started learning poetry, and I liked that too. And every time I would read it, I was like, ooh, I want to see if I can do that. I want to try to do that. I want to try to come up with the same. This is a sestina. I'm going to look up what a sestina is. I'm going to try to write a sestina. I read the line. I'm like, ooh, I like that line. I'm going to write a response to that line. And what he didn't realize that I didn't realize was that he had actually put me on a path where I was actually learning how to be a better poet by learning from other poets. So if we don't read, it's kind of hard to write. It'd be like learning how to play music and never listening to music. Pretty difficult thing to do, right? So he told me, why are you here? You're wasting your time. Go to the mothership. Go to Columbia. You'll love it. Okay, I didn't know any better. I went to the Columbia campus, absolutely fell in love with it. You're born in South Carolina, right? You're born in one of two houses. You're either born a Clemson Tiger or you're born a Carolina Gamecock. I was born a Gamecock. I was going. I'm there, baby. And then there was also 5 points. And there's also plenty of reasons to not go to class because I could just go down there and eat sub sandwiches and drink beer and just live the life, you know. Until one day, I go into a class that I just totally took really by accident because I didn't really have a great advisor. He just said, here, just take some classes and get out of my office. I said, okay. And I took this class called Rhetoric for Writers by a professor by the name of Dr. Carolyn Madeline. And she told me 2 very important things, one in class and then one later. In class, after class one day, I'm walking out and she goes, Ray, come here for a second. I'm like, okay. Do me a favor. I was like, yes, ma'am. I said, don't come to my class stoned anymore. It's like, you can tell? She's like, I think everybody can. I mean, you know, please, you're wasting your time. That's the 3rd time I've heard this already. You're wasting your time. When you're 20-something, or you're in your teens, you hear that, and you're like, time? I got lots of time. But when you hear it from somebody older, what they're saying is, don't make the same mistakes we all made. You're wasting your time. I said, okay, and I took her to her word. I quit coming to class stoned anymore. I just quit coming to class. I'm just kidding. I quit coming to class stoned. I quit getting stoned. I said, Dr. Madeline, would you be my advisor? She said, yeah, you need advice. And this is when she told me the second most important thing. She said, you need to take Ed Madden's poetry workshop. And I was an undergraduate. James Dickey is still there at Carolina, though he's not in great health. And I was a little chicken to be taking James Dickey's workshops, right? But I figured, A, this is fantastic. Only in America could you go to college and take a poetry workshop and get academic credit for it. That's fantastic. And B, I'll take it with this new guy. Don't know anything about him. And what Ed did in class in those workshops blew me away. I thought we would just get to write what we wanted to write, but he gave us prompts. He gave us crazy off-the-wall things, didn't tell us where we were going with them. He just said, tell me your favorite word. Everybody went around the room. Got to me, I was like, okay. Asking me what my favorite word is? I'll give you a hint. It starts with an F, ends with a K. Just because I wanted to see him put it on the board, which he did. And then everybody in the class had to write a poem using that word, and that was kind of glorious. But then one day he'd come in there with a box of crayons, and he just walked around the room and said, close your eyes and pull out a crayon. I was like, oh, okay. So pull out a crayon. I was lucky, I got black. Okay. Black's a good color for poets. And from that exercise, I ended up writing a poem that won the Academy of American Authors Poetry Prize. And that's when I realized something about poetry. If you wait for it to come, if you wait for inspiration to hit you, you may never write a poem. I mean, we're inspired every day, right? I mean, little things inspire us, big things inspire us. We're Americans, so underdogs inspire us all the time, right? But if we wait for that, it may not happen. We're so caught up in that moment. Invention, however, gives us these opportunities to write. It's not everything happening around us. It's us taking the time to stop and just invent the opportunity. So learning how to do that, to be able to write a poem about anything, at any moment, at any time. And I'm not saying great poems either, y'all. I mean, some of it's just outright garbage. But there's a line there, there's a stanza there, there's an idea there that I'm able to come back to later. It ends up becoming another poem, becomes something else. There have been times when I wanted to write, just wasn't jiving, just wasn't hitting the notes. And so I said, okay, you know what? I'm going to get out of my comfort zone for a second. I'm going to go with the long form. I'm going to write fiction. I'm going to write essays. I'm going to go into something else. I got this idea. I want to try it. What I always end up gravitating back towards, though, is a poem. Because that's what I am, a poet. But it took me a long time for me to be able to call myself that. Because all through undergraduate, I was just writing poems. And then Ed said, you need to stay, man. You need to get an MFA. I was like, what the hell's an MFA? He's like, it's a Master of Fine Arts. I was like, in what? It's like, poetry. I haven't seen you dance. It's like, that's a good thing. So I did. I took the MFA program. I called them my two dads. I had Ed on one shoulder and I had Kwame Dawes on the other shoulder. And both of them are directing me and teaching me how to be a better poet. Now, still wasn't calling myself that. In fact, we had a festival we used to have called the Fall Festival of Writers. I think now it's called Open Book, but back then it was called the Fall Festival of Writers. In one particular year, I think it was my second year in the MFA program, we had Susan Ludvigson from the upstate. We had Nikki Finney, and Nikki Finney at the time was in Kentucky. Jeanette Hospital, who was there at USC. And I was invited to go to lunch with them. They only invited just a couple of grad students to do that, so it was kind of an honor. And I'm sitting there at the table with Nikki Finney, and so she goes, so, are you a poet? I said, no ma'am, I just write poetry, thinking it would be a joke. She didn't laugh. We talked a little bit, and it was a conversation going on. I just ate my food, like I was homeless, because that's what we did as grad students. We'd do anything for a free meal. And afterwards, we're all leaving, we're all saying goodbye, shaking hands, and I went to go shake her hand, and I don't know if y'all ever seen Nikki Finney? I mean, she's like 6'2". She's very towering, long dreadlocks, beautiful but very towering and intimidating individual. When she looks you in the eye and has to bend down to do that. And she pulls me in and says, Ray, don't play with it. Now, I did not know what she meant. There was a part of me, the 12-year-old brain was like, well, that depends on what it is. Years later, I understood exactly what she meant. You can write poetry. You can write stories. You can play music. But sooner or later, you're going to have to decide, are you going to devote your life to this? It's going to be something that's going to be a part of your life. The moment that I decided that I was going to be a poet was shortly before the first book came out. I knew then by going around and basically any place that would let me come in and read or do a poetry workshop, primarily because I just wanted to give young people an opportunity I never had. That if you're going to do this, you're going to make this a part of your life and you're going to go all in, then yeah, call yourself a poet. Now, it's not always been easy. And I get students that ask me this all the time. Can you make money? Can you live off of being a poet? I was like, no, not in America. You cannot. The age of the benefactor is over. However, every now and then I've got friends of mine, South Carolina poet Terrence Hayes, by the way, who has gotten like all of the big fellowships, MacArthur, Whitting, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Yes, Terrence Hayes can make a living being a poet. Ray McManus, however, needs a day job. And so being a professor, which is, believe it or not, the other love that I have in my life, I have 4 loves in my life: being a professor, being a poet, being a husband, being a father, 5, and now being a granddad. But being a professor allowed me some opportunities to be able to impart with young students the power of poetry. And not just by getting them to write it or read it and to hear me talk about it, but because I can be living proof to them. I am seriously living proof of the transformative power that the arts have for young people. Had I not taken that opportunity to use terrible vocabulary to a teacher when she walked into the men's room and asked me what I had in my hand, I would not have gone to in-school suspension. I would have not have found that book. I would not have stolen that book, which, by the way, I did give the book back 25 years later. I wrote a little inscription, went back to my old high school. It was after Punch came out, and it said, "Stealing this book of poetry saved my life. Thank you." And I gave it back to the librarian who wasn't the same librarian. I think she might be dead. But she opened it up, saw the inscription, and started crying. And said, this book did more for you than it could for anybody else just sitting on the shelf. In fact, she said, I wonder who else checked out this book. I said, well, you'll never know, because I was scared the library police would find me, so I tore all that stuff out and threw it away, But probably maybe nobody. Might have been the only one that ever checked that book out. But when I'm out there and I'm talking with students, and I'm talking to my students, one of the things that I've tried to express to them is that, look, what you're doing now, try to capture, try to record, because it's going to go, it's going to leave, and it'll be gone before you know it, and then life begins. And then you have to navigate that. Some people do a pretty good job of it. Some of my students run into me every now and then, and they'll send me a big thank you. They're like, man, there's something you said in a lecture that changed my life. I'm like, oh my God, what did I say? And they would tell me, I'm like, I said that? And they were like, yeah, you said that. You said it 3 times, as a matter of fact. A little bit more colorful language than I care to remember, but yeah, you said it. So, that's why I write. For you all, if that's something that you ever think about doing or want to do, then I would say, do it now. Otherwise, you're wasting your time. Because the next generation that comes up, they're not going to know about the place that they're living in. They're not going to know about the state that they're living in. I didn't know anything about South Carolina until I started writing. I didn't know anything about the place I grew up. I wanted to burn the whole place to the ground. I was bored to death. I fished, hunted a little bit, but then after a while I was like, I don't want to clean that. I knew I couldn't eat the whole deer, so I didn't hunt deer. Fish, fine, no problem, because I can pull the hook back out and throw them back in the water. You can't do that to a deer. You can't take the bullet out and put them back to life and send them on their way. But other than that, I was pretty bored out there. And what I didn't realize at the time was that there was so much history to that place that I could have been learning. I hated South Carolina. I could not wait until I turned 18 years old in a day, because I was packing my stuff up and moving out, I don't know, maybe to California. Yeah. Didn't make it as far as Augusta. Because life has a way of reminding you real quick, you don't get to do everything you want to do. as I started writing, as I started reading, as I started paying attention to the place, as I started to take awareness of where I was, I started to appreciate it more. Our state is not the best state in the country. You can look at all the lists out there to see. We're at the bottom of every list we want to be at the top of, and the top of the list of all that we want to be at the bottom of. But I absolutely love the state of South Carolina. It's a weird state. It looks funny. It's this triangular looking thing. We got foothills, we got beaches, and we got some of the best damn people in the country. And I know because I've been all over the country reading, and I'm going to tell you, reading in South Carolina and talking to South Carolinians is easy. Talking to those Westerners, New Englanders, not so much. And they always have the wrong idea. Always have the wrong idea. Wow, y'all read in South Carolina? You had a book of poetry in a library that wasn't colored in? They think somehow that we're still living in, I don't know, the shadows or the smoke of Civil War. And I'm like, yeah, some people are, but not the entire state. They're shocked to find out that there are probably more poets and writers in our state per capita than you're going to find in any of the big places where you expect to find poets and writers. You can't throw a rock in the state of South Carolina without hitting a poet. That's a fact. I've thrown them and hit them. And they ask, of course, well, why? I'm like, are you kidding? In order to be a good writer, one must suffer. One must have misery. South Carolina is perfect for it. And they look at me funny. I'm like, you come visit us in late July, early August. We'll show you misery. I have friends of mine up north. They laugh at us all the time, man. If we get a half an inch of snow, close it down. And they're laughing, man, well, I had to go to school. You know, it'd be a foot of snow. I'm like, yeah. And then all y'all people would die the moment it turned over 88 degrees. We're like, whoo. That's a cold front. But a lot of that, the history of this place, which is not always something to celebrate, but it's something to learn. And the things that we do in life, we were just talking about this beforehand. Chloe back there, she's like, oh yeah, we were talking about this. Part of our job as we get older is to be able to teach younger people how not to make the same mistakes we made. And we can try to do that through advice, but people don't listen to older people when we give them advice. All right? They just don't. Neither did we when we were younger. That's something that happens to us, right? We're just hard-headed. But when we write about it, it gives opportunity for folks to be able to read that and learn from that mistake, but they never feel like it's you giving them this advice. They're learning it from somebody else, because we have convenient disguises. The person speaking in the poem isn't me, that's the speaker. That's not me writing the story, that's the narrator. It's like, yeah, bullshit. It's us, okay? It's stuff coming from our own experiences. I made a lot of mistakes. Sometimes I can correct those when I write. Sometimes it's cathartic for me because I don't necessarily remember all the things that led up to that mistake. Sometimes it's therapeutic for me because that mistake has haunted me for my entire life. How you could have just said 3 simple words and somebody might be living. Or the fact that you could have stopped to say 3 simple words and that person would have known how you felt while they were still living. All of these things are ways that I can come back to only because I write. Now, all of that to say, sometimes it's good to write about things that bring us joy. Especially when you are seeing in this day and age so much that's out there that seems to show us the opposite. And it becomes a nice reminder that there is more joy in the world than there is pain. There is more decency in the world than there is indecency. You wouldn't believe it if you turned on your television. because the news isn't built that way. They don't want to tell us all the good stories. It's the sensational things. This is what Americans want. Let's talk about all the people that were murdered, and let's talk about the car accidents, and let's talk about the train derailments and the environmental catastrophes. And let's not even get started with what's going on in the Middle East or in Eastern Europe. And then, of course, every political cycle, there's more stories about people acting crazy and doing stupid stuff. And it becomes very easy for us to think sometimes, my God, where is this world going? What happened to us? I would say we just need more writers. We need more folks to be able to talk about things that they see in their lives, because we don't always see that. I had a wonderful 3-hour drive here from Columbia. The sun was shining. There was only 2 dead animals on the side of the road, and I was able to still identify what they were. There weren't people driving crazy and nuts, people just trying to get to work or trying to get wherever they're going. And most of that road I was on, there wasn't a single soul on it, you know. And then there was moments in our heads where we start thinking, man, if I broke down here, I guess I'm just going to die. There's more to life than the doom and gloom. Yes, we need to talk about them. And yes, there are opportunities for us to learn from them, as we should. Because we can't run from our past, we can't hide from history, but we can learn from it. But then there's the joyous moments that we have that other people may not have the opportunity to have. I got to see 3 kids being brought into this world. There are some people that wish that they could have seen 1. And then on top of that, I got to see a grandkid brought into this world. And there are some that hope that they could see 1. Maybe they never see any. There are things that I got to see my kids do that I never got to do. I saw my son go from striking out every single baseball that was thrown at him in a tryout to hitting a home run. I never did that. My daughter get up on stage and dance. I certainly never did that. And now that they're moving out, it's weird because and Dan and I were talking a little bit about this. You know, his oldest one's in college. My oldest is finishing college. Our middle one, she moved out. She started college. Then life gave her a little detour, and she met a guy, and he's a great guy. He's her fiance. We love him. But 2 leave, 3 come back. I don't understand. It's like addition by subtraction. And then our youngest one, now that we know how fast that's going to go, you know, everything, we're like, you know, please don't grow up. Please stay a baby forever. Of course, she's not. She's 16 now and reminds us of it every day. But I get to see these things and witness these things, and if I'm writing about them, I can share these things because there is more joy out there waiting to be shared. So, that too is why I write, and that too is why I think we should write. So speaking of sharing, you want to hear some poems? So that first poem I was telling you about that I wrote, I'll read 2 from the new book, from the old book. The first book, geez, where am I? I'll read the first one here. This is from that crayon exercise. 2 things happened here. One, obviously, winning that award and seeing it published was huge. But it also helped me to get in touch with some of my ancestral roots. You know, when you grow up in the South, you kind of lose touch of some of that. A lot of it's imaginary. Your parents just tell you things, or your grandparents tell you things. Now, luckily, we have genealogical sites that we can go to, and then you start finding out a lot more. Like I would hear, well, you're about 50-50, Irish-German. Like, okay, no, they would actually say 50-50, Scots-Irish-German. And then we started looking up, like, we're not Scots-Irish, we're Irish. And then I started looking even further, and like, man, we're not even a quarter German. Which my mom was like, but that doesn't seem right. I'm like, yeah, your grandmother married, but she's straight from the boat from Ireland. I'm like, wow, never knew it. Then I found out some stuff about her dad, which was kind of cool too, but I'll share that in another story. But anyway, learning about where I'm from really helped me to understand where I was. So poem is called Black. When I was 14 and my pop quoted Yeats for the last time in his loaded Irish accent, my grandmother stood there trembling in blackness, wringing out the tears that ran across the creases of her yellow, over-ripened face. I was just a boy in my own blackness, my lungs blackened from each drum I rolled, thinking of my pop and his bitter black coffee. When I was 7, he taught me about custody and culture, a hand-me-down story of how he burned, or rather ran with those who burned, a Protestant shop in Enniskillen. A story about ashes, about never going back to see Ulster's black sky, his mother, his father, his eldest boy, all in their blackness, all in their graves. Well, and I'll tell you too, that story's completely made up. My grandfather wasn't from Enniskillen. Granted, his great-great-great-great-grandfather was. McManus has been in South Carolina before there was a country. So we've been here for a long time. But I wouldn't have known it because I was told and made it sound like, yep, we just came off a boat, found our way into the mountains, and then found our way to Columbia. Not true. The other thing that I was able to learn very early on through writing was my relationship with work and how that is a relationship to life. And so much about how I've learned how to work and work hard because I work for people who really taught me sometimes in ways I probably, wish they would have been a little kinder at it, but taught me the value of hard work and not to be afraid of hard work. But I worked cutting trees, putting in floors, worked on farms, cleaning out chicken houses, you name it, manual labor, I've done it. But an undergraduate, the first job I ever had in air conditioning was working in a grocery store. And I worked for Bilo, back when there was a Bilo. And and it was a place that allowed me to be able to work basically all the shifts I needed to because I was working full-time, going to school full-time, living on my own in an apartment, because hard-headed me, hell-bent on moving out of the house, didn't realize I could have done my laundry for free, I could have eaten for free, but whatever. So there's a poem about work that I think kind of helps us to understand how life is, and that's an important thing when you're early 20s because you step out in the world thinking it owes you something. It doesn't. Orientation. You see that man, he is your boss. He'll tell you to bend over and pick up the loose temple orange that rolls on the floor, and you will. And you will hand it to him. And he will wipe the blade of his knife using the bottom of his apron and cut the orange into 4 equal pieces. And he will not give you one. Because isn't that how it is? They don't give us anything. You earn it. Thank you, Chloe. So, that was from my first book, Driving Through the Country Before You Were Born. And my first book, when I was working on it, I didn't know anything about a book, making a book. I was writing poems. We were in workshops. You were expected to produce, and I would keep doing the prompts over and over and over again until I got poems out of it that I really liked. And then sometimes I would end up getting multiple poems out of the same prompt, completely different subjects even. But when it got to the end where it's like, all right, now we got to start thinking about a book and trying to arrange all of this, it became pretty clear to me that what I was really writing about at that time was coming of age. And very much about what life was like, where I grew up, how I understood things then, which was so naive. And then ultimately finding my way right on up into adulthood, working my way right on up to middle management, jumped it right away and got married. Big mistake. Not a good idea, getting married young, because I kept growing, she didn't. Things weren't working out, so we come up with a brilliant plan when the marriage isn't working. Let's have a kid. That way we got something to love. When that didn't work, you know what, let's have a second kid. And when that didn't work, I had to ultimately make the decision Is this what I want our kids to see? Is this how I want our kids to think love is like? And that was a hard, hard time. But I was able to get through it because I was writing through it. And I actually began to think maybe this whole love thing is just a big lie. Until one day, in Irish literature class, in the PhD program, I look across the table and the sunlight was coming in through the room and it was shining on this really pretty girl with this pretty blonde hair. And so I go up to her and I'm like, hey, we just met. I'm recently divorced, got 2 kids and drive a minivan. You want to go out on a date? And she said, sure. And then that's when I realized there is such a thing as love. So I married that woman. And here's a little bit of a poem about it. Now this poem is from my second book, Red Dirt Jesus. And it's very much a book about religion, believe it or not, but how I grew up with religion. I grew up in a Southern Baptist church. And when the lights were on, it meant the McManuses were there. My dad was chairman of the deacons. My mom was Sunday school director. We were there Sunday mornings, Sunday evenings, Tuesday visitation, Wednesday Bible study, RAs, GAs, and then one Saturday a month for cleanup. And then Thursday nights, my dad, because that's where I get it from, they needed somebody to clean the church, and he said, hey, that'd be a great way to pick up some extra money, and he could put his kids to work. So on Thursday nights, we're there cleaning the church. So we were there a lot. But there were a lot of things with an overactive imagination and a lot of questions that I had that just never got answered in that church. It's not that I am anti-church or that I'm anti-religion at all. That's, especially the older I get, the more I really, really am more careful about those things. But I wasn't finding a lot of God in that church. Found more in a tree, but not in that church. But back to Lindsay, my wife. Missing curfew. It will be serious from this point on. The dark hours are coming. Venus flickers and children stop playing, look up and shiver. I'm not ready to go home to my father's house, take my place among the thorns and rocks, barter my body for a clean sheet. I'm not ready to hide what I don't want you to see when the sun drives out the safety of shadows. I'm not ready to be a ghost to walk the hills as a proof of the miracle of wind. There is comfort in the touch of strangers, in the shame of the crowd, in the blind running savage in the mud. But I'm not ready to live forever. Just for now. Just for now. So, and I'm just going to read about 2 or 3 more points. How much time have we got? Oh, good. So I'm going to read a poem from Punch, which is very much a book about work. I wanted to pay homage to the working class. I always thought it would have been neat back when I was working those kinds of jobs, because I used to watch, especially when I'd cut school and stuff, I'd watch ETV because that was a channel we would get, and we got 4, and that was one, and they always had really cool things in the afternoons, and they would show these cool documentaries. I always thought it'd be cool if a documentary crew had showed up to the tree crew one day and just had us tell stories about the things that we do, and they could learn something about us. That crew never came. So I became the documentarian for a lot of the work that I did. And this book really does kind of look in a lot of the various jobs I did, and then in the second part of it, very much about working with the tree service, and then the third part of it, where things get weird, moving from a blue-collar world to a white-collar world. Believe it or not, there are many times when I've sat in my office during office hours and stared out the window, and somebody's working on maybe removing a tree or cutting the grass, and think to myself, I wish I could be out there with them. There's a finality to getting work done. There's no finality here. I have no idea if I'm doing any good for these students or not. I'm sitting here all by myself in an office. Stinking thinking, that's what that's called. As soon as you walk outside and that 97-degree heat hits you and the humidity's 100%, you're like, yeah, I'm glad to be back in my office doing nothing. But this is a job that I did not work. This was a job that I wanted to do, but I never did. Blacksmithing, I think, is an incredible job. And I was asked to be a part of this program called Remaking Moby, where the editors asked writers, musicians, artists to come up with a different artistic rendition of a particular chapter of Moby Dick. I got the blacksmith. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go watch blacksmithing. So I did, went to Camden, watched this lady. I mean, she was badass, man. I mean, she was doing some cool stuff. And then I had to record this video, I had to record this poem, and we don't have a quiet place, especially when all the kids were little. So I had to climb in the chest freezer in the garage and read this poem, with the light of my cell phone, and recording myself. And you can hear it on YouTube, and you'll hear about midway through where I almost die. But nobody else would know that. But if you listen to it, you can hear it. Just type in Ray McManus Blacksmith on YouTube and see if you can pick out the moment where I almost died. Tell your friends. The blacksmith. Blistered hands, hearts, and tongue give way to callous. The need to alter, to repair, to thicken. This is patience. There isn't a track for the haunted to follow, to go from forge to pound, to collar, to grind, to strain silent, slow, and solemn. Only iron stress and the fire that saves the bowed from broken. The beating makes what was strong stronger, but I am no more iron or the slip choke of fire stoked and running too hot. This is temper and upset, control and measure. A hammer holds the bitter back, what flies, what fatal, what sprawls or shrivels, no matter the motion, no matter the difference, what sends each strike a promise that a day is just another piece to shoulder, another way for drawing out, another way for the soul to drift. What refuses to die, what gets taken to the cusp will be better than it was before. This is the saving of ruin, to quench, to blacken, to harden. Now, I'll read a poem from the latest book. Y'all have been a great audience, by the way. So, I get asked, I've been asked this in a couple of interviews so far, why the last Saturday in America? I did not set out to write a COVID book. I started writing this book shortly after Punch, believe it or not. I started writing it because there were some things going on in my life where I started for the first time to really kind of question the whole idea of masculinity. I was brought up a certain way. I thought a certain thing. And after my wife, basically almost died, and the delivery of our daughter Lennon, we were in the doctor's office afterwards, and for checkup, follow-up, whatever. And he starts talking about how the chances of her having another child would probably not end well for her. Her chance of survival and the baby's chance of survival would be slim. And then immediately launches into all the different things that she could have done to herself. All the invasive procedures that could be done, the surgeries and the different things that they could implant in her body. And I'm sitting over here in a corner going, I could do something. So I did. It was the easiest decision I could have made. Except when I'm at the ball field with my son's playing baseball, and I'm over there helping some of the other dads, and I'm like, hey, I'm not going to be in practice Friday or at the game Saturday. I'm getting a vasectomy. And I watch all the blood just drain out of their faces like, oh my God, what happened? I'm like, nothing. I just think it would be terrible if, my wife died and the kids are stuck with me for the rest of their lives. I mean, phew. Can you imagine growing up in a house with just a poet? They didn't understand that joke either. But the fact is, I started on that. And then 2016 happened. And then 2017 happened. And then 2018 happened. And then when you thought, this place can't get any crazier, this place said, hold my beer. And then 2019 happened. And next thing I know, we're all stuck in the house fighting for, can we find chicken and toilet paper? Because this is not going to end well. And all of that stuff is going on in this book, but the one thing that I noticed that we truly missed during that time, because I'll be honest with you, with the exception of people dying and close ones that I knew that died, I liked being at home with my family. And what I didn't realize then was that would be the last time that my family would all be together under the roof before we all got back to our daily lives and then they got older and moved out. But the one thing we truly missed was Saturdays. Because all the days just kind of bled into the next. It used to be we were working Monday through Friday, man, just to get to Saturday. In the grind every single day just to get to Saturday. And all of a sudden that's gone. Now we're coming back to it, and I hope that we've remembered that we don't get so much lost in the grind of things. But it sure is nice having our Saturdays back. So, here's a poem called Nobody's Bargain. I watch her and she watches me, moving from office to den to backyard, and then den to office to backyard again. The side grin between sliding glass doors, the office to kitchen to den to bathroom to office to bed, and then the morning comes, fast. Another day moves faster than the one before until it feels like it's not moving at all. And there's mornings where we yell because another day moves louder than the one before until it forces us to scream our words if we have anything to say. And I hear her. And she hears me moving from pantry to fridge to stove to porch to stove again, running into furniture and cursing ash on the carpet. And I hear her ask what's wrong. And she hears me say nothing. Because my throat hurts and I don't know if I can smell what's cooking or burning, and nothing can distract me from the fact that I could be responsible for killing everyone in this house, or my neighbor's house, or her parents, or my parents, or the cashier at Lowe's Foods where I bought a beer and walked around the store sometime in early spring thinking about how much I liked seeing some of the people in Jasper County, Georgia. How easy it was then to not know anything and just feel. To think distance required agency, to see food on the shelves. And it's at that moment when I start to question what I cannot taste before I even put it in my mouth that I feel her hand on my back. And it's at that moment she feels me let go and breathe as I look through the door of the stove. Smells good, she says. And I'll be damned. She's right. Thank y'all.